So in today's lesson, we're going to look at Samples and Populations Investigation 2. We're going to begin this investigation by defining some terms. And as we come to this investigation, we're going to talk about choosing a sample from a population. So the first term we need to understand is this term population. So when we talk about a population, we're talking about the entire group of people. So we could think of it like this. If I were to take and draw a big circle on my piece of paper, and we just took these dots would represent people or whatever it is that's a part of the group. And I have all these dots, and if I were to count up every single dot that I just made on this piece of paper, if I count up all of those dots, I'm going to add some more dots because I want to have lots of dots. So there's my population. Everybody inside of that circle, all of these people, this is the population. Everybody. So it's the entire group. Everybody in the group is a population, or is a part of the population. Like we could just say the population of the United States is everybody in the United States. Or the population of Washington State, everybody in Washington State. So when we talk about an entire group of something, we're talking about the population of Blaine Middle School where we are. It'd be everybody that is in Blaine Middle School. Now, the other part of that is a sample. So we got a sample and a population. So it says choosing a sample from a population. So if I were to choose some people out of this, like if I chose this person, we're going to just circle some that we're going to choose, like this one here, and this one here, and this one here, and I'm kind of just sort of picking randomly, although this is not truly random, which we'll talk about in a later lesson, but I'm just picking some of the group, and let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, one more, I'm going to pick one more. So now I just took a sample. Those 10 that I circled would be a sample of this population. It's not everybody, it's a smaller group, and so the smaller group or the individuals that I picked in my little red circles now, so if I think of my little red circles, these are my sample size or sample group. And a sample is generally not the entire population. Sometimes it could be. If the population is a very small population, you could actually take the whole group, really just be talking about taking the whole population rather than a sample. So we got the population, which is the whole group, and we have the sample, the little ones that we chose out of this to be our sample in this case. So population, everything, sample, small group. Now, in investigation 2, what we're going to focus on is how did I pick that sample? How did I choose those 10? And there's different ways to do that. And so we're going to focus on different ways of collecting or choosing a sample and looking at the different size. I chose 10. Why did I choose 10? Why didn't I choose 20 or 50 or more? And so all of those different factors will influence what we find out in investigation 2. So that's kind of just the introduction part of this. So we're going to look at the samples and the populations, and we're going to study how we gather information from groups of people or about different things as we do this. In our previous investigation, we were actually looking at peanut butters, and we actually did an experiment in our class where we tasted peanut butters and we used that information to make predictions about what peanut butters people like. So that's why we do this, is it gives us information about those kinds of things. So I'm going to jump right on into the actual problem 2.1 here. And in problem 2.1, this is on page 28 in the book, Samples and Populations, which is what we're using in our class. And in this case, we're going to begin with this survey that it says was given. And it says newspapers, magazines, radios, and television programs and internet sites, they conduct surveys on various subjects. So here's our scenario. We have a magazine with a national circulation, which is an important point already that they've given us here. If this is a national circulation, then they told us already right here, national circulation, that's our population right there. So I'm kind of working ahead to where there's going to be a question. So our population is national. It's the United States, people who live in the US. So that's our population. It's the United States of America. And it asks its readers 5 questions about honesty. And so the questions are listed below. Really, the questions is just an example of a survey. It's not something we're going to use, but the idea is that if this magazine has a national circulation, it goes out to people in the United States, and it asks them to go to their website and enter their answers. So what we're looking at now is a way of gathering information. And in this case, the information being gathered is the questions to the survey being answered. So we have a national circulation. Again, I'm going to remind us what's happening here. National circulation, there's our population. It's everybody in the United States. And they want them to go to the website to enter their answers. So right away we're given what's called a sampling plan or a strategy. This is the strategy that they're going to use to get responses to this survey. So the idea is it's national, that's my population. And then not everyone in the United States, first of all, reads this magazine. And not everyone who reads the magazine will respond. In other words, they're only going to get a sample of people that are going to respond. And those people that respond are going to have to respond voluntarily. In other words, they're going to have to go to the website and enter their answers. And so that's what we call actually a sampling plan or strategy. The strategy is put the survey in the magazine. So here's the survey, it's in the magazine, and tell people to go and respond. So the sample is going to simply be people that respond to the survey. Not everyone, not the whole population will respond, only a sample group will. And so if you think about this first question you're asked in the book, it says, a sampling plan is a strategy for choosing a sample of the population. So we've already talked about what is the population for the honesty survey. It's the whole, everybody in the United States that reads the magazine. So we have the whole United States, and the sample size are those particular people that actually volunteer to answer the survey. They go online and answer the survey. So if I were going to answer this question, these 2 questions, I would answer them just like this, just like we just talked about. So first of all, the population is everyone in the USA, and the sample are the people who responded to the survey. The sample is self-selected. In other words, people voluntarily respond. They self-select. I choose to go to the website. I choose to answer the questions if I'm a reader of the magazine. So the population is everyone. The sample is those that choose to respond. So now we're talking about how we get a sample group from a population in a survey. First introductory piece of this. And then once we get information, then we want to try to be able to do something with it. So in this first question, we've decided that the sampling plan, which is our strategy, is to put this survey in a magazine, and our population is the whole United States, and our sample is those that respond, and they're self-selecting. They're not really chosen. You don't go out and pick people. They pick themselves. And so now we're self-selecting. So then we can answer some other questions. Suppose that we have 5,280 people in the survey that actually complete it. And we want to just do some basic mathematical calculations. So we have 5,280 people that complete the survey. 4,224 answer no. So what percent of the responders would say that they would not? So now we're going to just do a simple calculation of percent. We're going to take the 4,224 out of 5,280, and we're going to find a percent. And to do that, we're going to take, just go ahead and use my calculator, show you how to do my calculations. 4,224 divided by 5,280, and we're going to get a decimal answer. Anytime you're trying to find a percent, it's a per 100, so we're really basically saying 8 out of 10, 8/10. That's what that decimal represents. And so that equals 0.8. But I need to change that to percent because that really represents 8/10, which is the same as 80/100, which is the same as 80%. So that's kind of the, some of you may know just by looking at that 0.8 that that's 8/10 or 80/100, which is 80%. So that means 80%, what percent of responders say they would not cheat on an exam? 80% said they would not cheat on an exam. And so that's the answer to question, or part B of 1.2. And if we keep going, next question says, now we have 5,280 responders, 1,584. So again, I'm going to make a fraction. That's the whole, and these are the ones, 1,584. Say yes to question 4. And question 4 says, would you download music from the internet illegally instead of buying a CD? And it says that 1 said yes. Now this is an interesting question because the question, first of all, gives us this many that said yes, but the question is how many would not? So we're going to get a percent here, just like we did before. 1,584 divided by 5,280. And so we get 0.3. And you know that 0.3 is 3/10, or 30/100, or 30%. Now be careful with this one because the question here is 30% said yes they would, so what percent would not? So here's the question, is actually would not. 30% would, so if 30% would, that means the rest, 100% minus 30%, or 70%, would not. So that's how I would answer part C of problem 2.1. So right now, all we're doing now is we've got a sampling plan and a method and a survey, and what we're doing is learning how we would interpret the data if we had responses. So that's what we're doing. And then if we move on to part D, now we're going to expand this data into what it represents for the whole population. So what we had here was a sample of 5,280 people. And we said this many would say no, 4,224. Here we had the same sample, and this many, 1,584, said yes to that question. Now, what if we were trying to just figure out what the whole population, like if we said that there's 300 million people in the United States, we have 300 million. I'm going to put all the zeros in there so you can see all those zeros. 300 million people. And if we want to estimate how many people in the United States would say they would not cheat on an exam, we have to go back to our earlier question where we found that 80% said they would not. So now we want 80% of 300 million. So 80% of that. So whenever you have a 80% or a percent of something, if you know your sort of mathematical rules, that's 80% times 300 million. Or if you really want to where that comes from, I'm going to write it this way. 80 out of 100 equals how many out of 300 million? So this is the part. It's called a ratio proportion problem. And so what we're really going to do is take that 80% times, it's called cross multiplying, times 300 million divided by 100. I'm going to make this really simple by skipping all these steps and remembering that 80% is the same as 0.8 or 8/10 or 81/100 as a decimal. I'm simply going to go ahead and do this division right up front and go 0.8 times 300 million. So here we go. 0.8 times 300, and I'm going to just leave 300 in there because I know it's 300 million. I know I'm kind of skipping some steps, but these are really shortcuts that you can use. If you can remember that 300 represents 300 million. And then when you hit your answer button, remember that that answer is not 240 but 240 million. So I can save myself some zeros and know that when I do this calculation, this is equal to 240 million. So the answer is 240 million people out of 300 million, 80%. This is equal to 80% of the 300 million. 80% of 300 million is 240 million people. So that takes care of part 1 of D. How many people in the United States say they would not cheat on an exam? How about the next one? Estimate how many people in the United States would say that they would not download music illegally. So now we have the other part of that question we already answered. We already said that 70% would not. So we have 70% now. 70% of 300 million. I'm actually just going to not put the zeros this time and think of this completely as 300 million. 70% of 300 million, or 0.7 times 300. So now I'm going to really just go ahead and use the shortcut, because this is what we really do when we're taking percent of something. We multiply by the decimal form of the percent. And I could even put the 0 in there, and it's not going to change anything. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this, because 0.70 is not any different than 0.7. The 0 doesn't change anything. This is 7/10, that's 71/100. 70% is 70 out of 100. That's what that really represents as a fraction. So now what we've got is this all in these same forms multiplied by 300. So now I'm going to just take that 0.7 times 300, and I will get 210 million. And I'm going to keep that 210 million. This is really million. 300 million. 210 million would not illegally download music from the internet. Okay. Now, when I move on to parts E and F, this is where we get to just making some interpretations of our own from the problem. So I'm going to leave you with some thoughts on these. Reasons why predictions about all Americans based on this survey might be inaccurate. It's hard to make any prediction about everyone from any survey. And if you think about this particular magazine, even if it has a national circulation, I know lots of magazines with national circulation that I don't read. And so I would not have an opportunity to be a part of that survey. And so if the magazine has a national circulation, it doesn't mean that everyone reads it. And so it's very difficult, even when you get to question F, to revise the sampling plan so that you would be confident the results predict the percent of the United States population that's honest. You would have to find a way to survey a representative sample of the people of the United States in order to do that, which means you would have to get this survey out to a cross sample or a group of people that represents every person in the United States. And again, it's a very difficult process. It's one of the reasons why you get lots of phone calls from sampling groups all the time, because they're trying to do this. They're trying to get accurate results because they need to have a representative sample, which goes back to our original sort of question when we started this lesson. If this is my population, all the people in this circle, every one of them, and each of these dots just represents another person. Maybe there's more people over here because this is more population here, and maybe there's fewer here. And so again, the idea you pick out of this circle to make sure that you had a representative group that represents every one of these people, if that's what these represent in this circle. And that's the challenge of this investigation, trying to understand how to choose a sample group. Like, let's say if I just chose these people over here and they're my sample, is that a representative sample of the whole population? So here's my sample, here's my whole population. Do these people, do these dots represent everyone? Which is again the challenge of good statistical sampling. And so we're going to be looking at sampling plans in this investigation. So that's kind of an introduction, investigation 2, and most of the questions in problem 2.1. I think I've given you some help with answering there.